My dear friend, Dr. Tom Alan-Livernois, welcome to the Better World Leaders podcast.
I'm so glad I'm with you. Thank you for asking me. I love you.
What a beautiful place to begin. Thank you so much. Me too. Let's just be consistent for a little bit at the beginning of this dialogue for the benefit and arguably sake of our audience. Could you just explain a little bit about where you are today and what's going on for you right now?
Yeah, today where I'm actually sitting is I'm working at home like most other people. And I am in Los Angeles, California, at the base of the West Hollywood Hills, and right down the street from all Hollywood. And that's physically where I am. And mentally where I am is like I'm in a pretty good place. We in the US are really dealing with still a lot in regards to the pandemic. Social unrest is a little better. I mean, it's more in the background now, but it's still there. And, it depends on what culture you're in, I'm sure, how far up the ladder it is for you. And then we have an election coming up. It's just stressful.
Yeah.
So mentally, that's where I am. My relationships are good. My family's good. We'll maybe touch on this a little bit later, but this year I spent a lot of time with my mom as I walked her towards her transition. She did not die of COVID, but she did die of cancer. And it took about 4.5 months process. And so that was a big thing besides everything else for me this year of what we needed to deal with mentally and emotionally. And I'm finally coming back to normal, which is fantastic. And I have a lot more energy. Work-wise, I mean, you and I have been, it slowed down a little bit while I was taking care of her because we have another broadcast that we do. It's called the Tim Tom Talks, and we've had to put that on a hiatus for a little bit because of everything that was going on. And then, but business is building up back up here, or opportunities building back up here, which is great for bidding different jobs and different opportunities coming into the door. And I've decided to become a serial entrepreneur. Because I'm now doing a print-on-demand design and doing that. I'm going to start, and I don't think we've talked about this yet, but I am going to start doing affiliates marketing, a website, and it's really going to be tied to our work and what we do with leadership, and selling, creating links and recommending tools that are going to benefit the both of us. And then I'm also writing a book on stress management right now. It's a 4I stress management system. And it's going to be actually written by Tim and I, although I'm doing most of the work,
Yeah, I'm taking that very passive co-authorship approach.
I love working with Tim. I mean, I think one of the things that I love about where I am right now in my partnership is we very rarely get to truly enjoy our working relationship and truly respect the person that we're partnering with. It happens, and it's great what it does. And a lot of times that becomes not problematic, but challenged when you're in a larger corporation with so many things hitting you, and coming from different directions. And but with us, we're building this together. We're expanding 4I into the U.S. Market, North America, really. And the partnership that we have, one is we completely enjoy each other, and two is we completely respect each other. And we actually, while we think the same and we end up in the same place a lot, we challenge our thinking for each other. And I completely enjoy that working relationship.
Yeah, I would say you challenge me frequently on any number of levels.
And even I could even say sometimes I send them into fits.
Yeah, very brief fits, from which I normally emerge a better person. But I think this is the primary reason why I thought it would be beneficial to share one of our many conversations with the Better World Leaders audience, because I think there's so many reasons why the relationship, which is now really at the sort of the crux and the beating heart of how we're going to expand our practice, well, first into the US and then globally, is there's so many lessons in there around our philosophy, and essentially that's what this podcast is about. If your philosophy is around leadership that's going to be founded in values and purpose and strive to make the world better, how do you do that? How do you bring people into your organization? How do you engage people with what you're trying to do? And how do you then sort of create the space for them to take the lead and for that diversity to really sort of build adaptability and resilience and all of these things that we know are fundamental. And we'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to kind of punctuate just where you've sort of built that on-ramp, and I think we'll circle back to it in a little bit, because I think it's important for us to share a little bit more about your background, and then bring us to the point of how we met, and then we can talk about essentially the duration of the interval before we then met again, because I think that in of itself is interesting, and then what we've done to sort of to come together and bring you together and combine this grand philosophy, and now we can sort of announce where we're taking it and where we're going. So thank you for sharing so much of yourself, the enigma that is Dr. Tom Alan-Livernois. We can get to your PhD later, but thank you for sharing where you are today. Can you also share a little bit about where you've come from?
Well, I was born a poor black child in that's from the Steve Martin movie. It's one of Steve Martin movies. He was raised by a black family. He says, "I was born a small black child." Well, today I was born in LA. Actually, I'm one of 7 kids, and um, 4 boys, 4 girls, and I was raised Catholic and in a very emotionally controlled Catholic upbringing. So I was a very sensitive child, and just emotionally sensitive. As it came out later, or I came out later, ended up being gay, hence the emotionally sensitive. But it actually formed a lot of my resilience of and coping and my drive for finding a better place, not only for me, but for other people. So I was also blessed to be in a gifted school, and so I finished school early. So instead of going right into college, I decided to hang out and be a beach bum for 4 years, and
isn't that obligatory for Californians? Like, isn't there some mandated period of time that you have to just hang out on the beach in Malibu or something?
Stereotypical me. I even had a Volkswagen van.
There you go, the whole combi and everything.
I did with and the camper van at that. So you had the back, and you had it was quite the memories. And then I went back to college, and then I became in a rush. So I went back to school, put myself through school, and I got my BA in communications, and went into advertising and marketing. And my career has been it's been in marketing and advertising, but it's jumped around a bit, mainly because of industry changes. The industry I was first in when I was younger, from 16 to 26, was retail grocery. But I got to work in the last 3 years, I worked with the corporate offices and not in stores. And I worked on the launch of the first retail club card, grocery club card, with Citibank and our company. And I remember at that time, uh, my boss she was a very interesting researcher. I worked for both the researcher and the marketing director. And the researcher was so excited about this project, and I didn't understand it as much then as I definitely do now. And she said, the brilliance of what we're building is that for the first time, you can link all purchases to the person. So any product that comes through will be linked to the person. They were building the card and solving a problem because there was this thing in the US called double coupons. And so people were cutting coupons, and it created a lot of extra work. So by having a card and swiping it, you could get rid of the coupons. That was the consumer benefit. But the retail benefit was that all of a sudden, the whole ticket was associated with a person, with a, not necessarily a psychological profile, but your basics of income, location, geography. And you could begin building databases for especially consumer packaged goods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, today,
I think just very quickly on that, I mean, privacy's all of a sudden become very topical, and all of the stuff with Facebook. Earlier this year, following Cambridge Analytica, previously, just to sort of set the sort of the timestamp on where we are, even without the mention of the upcoming election. But all of this, behavior monitoring has been going on for decades and decades. And in a way where it's very much just kind of accepted that that's what you're signing up for.
Yeah, exactly. And even then, there was this whole industry. It's multi-billion-dollar business now in selling that information back to the consumer packaged goods companies, right?
Yeah.
That industry did not exist until that was created.
Yeah, so that was a first that you were directly involved with.
Yeah, and so that kind of put my, and the reason I'm telling that story more fully, and we'll fast forward, is that was my first introduction of being involved in something so big that it kind of changed the way the industries worked.
Yeah.
And that it actually created an industry.
Yeah.
And so that kind of became my drug in jobs and searching for things that were launching. So I worked on the launch of Lexus automobiles in the US.
Yeah. So being on the like the cusp of those sort of change-making waves, essentially.
Exactly. And so I've done many of those. But my marketing career, I decided I did everything I wanted to do with it. So what was my next evolution? And I had lost my job in 2009. And we'll go back to how I met Tim in that time, where I call it my soul vacation. I travel around the US volunteering, and we'll get back to that later. But then what I ended up doing when I came back is I decided I always wanted my master's, so I'd go to school and get my master's. So I got my first master's in marketing, and then I went to get my doctorate. And in the US, you have to get your master's from a regional school to be able to go for your doctorate, not a national school. I got my master's. So then I went and got another master's in organizational leadership. And actually, that was my gift, because as I went through that, I completely attached to it. I realized that what I've been searching for was all wrapped up in this organizational leadership ideal. So then I got my master's, and I was just going to give another master's at that point. But as I went through it, I realized, oh my God, I love this. I may as well go get a doctorate. Now that I got the doctorate, it's not all I may as well, but that's what drove me into organizational leadership, and now what I do.
So I think let's go back there. Let's go back to the lessons that you learned from Habitat for Humanity, in that soulcation, a beginning part of that soulcation, and then we can come to, the volunteering work, further south and where you and I first crossed paths. Because I think Yeah, one of the questions again that's very consistent here is the moments of calling that brought people into sort of these different parts of their career, and then maybe reorientation sometimes of and a pre-existing capability and experience. And I think this was some of the sort of foundational stuff for you. So 2019, we're in the depths of the GFC, which was particularly deep and cumbersome in America. 2009. Yeah. What did I say?
2019.
Oh, okay. So what lessons did you learn from that period of time?
Actually, that was the beginning of me truly understanding my purpose, what my purpose in life is. Now, it helped during that time. My friend actually gave me the book, How Will You Measure Your Life? And it's on Amazon. So if you want that book, it's amazing. And
yeah, I'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, and what the how will I measure my life actually has you go through an exercise of thinking about basically what are you going to put on your epitaph. But before that, what do you want to be known for? If you had the ideal life, what do you want to be known for? And I wrote as I went through this uh, soul vacation, I was able to write what my purpose in life was because I was living it. And I, at first, when I lost my job, I was crushed. I was so depressed. And I had a friend. My friend said, "Hey, you could just drive across the U.S." And I've always been one to volunteer and do and help people. So I thought about that. I said, you know what? I want to go to either South America or Africa, but I'm not sure. So how about if I just drive home and I'll plot out my journey and I'll volunteer for Habitat for Humanity along the way, and then I'll just visit my family. So I drove across the U.S. and then up to my friends in Seattle from Los Angeles, going through Portland with my sister, and so I went all over. But I would stop and volunteer, and part of my volunteer was in New Orleans, where I volunteered for Habitat for Humanity and helped to rebuild after Katrina. And I ran into somebody that had just come back from Peru and had volunteered for Pisco Sin Frontera. And she told me about it. I said, that sounds really cool. So I went in and I signed up. So the second half of the year, I went to Peru. And during this process, I realized that one, I was able to separate from the US and all US thinking because I was in the third world in real life. And I was out of a work environment and work life, and I was volunteering across the US, and I was reconnecting with life and seeing the different needs of people and realizing that, you know what, I need to find something with work that I'm able to give back as and put in. I need to figure out what I can put into life to help others and what they can bring back. And one of the purposes that I realized was that there's so many work environments that are problematic and really cause people pain and problems in life, that if I could, one, help improve work environments so that people have a better time at work and more purposeful time at work, that would be one of my purposes. And another would be being able to pay it forward and find shared missions where I could give back to the world as well and give back to society. Then those would be two of my purpose. I have 5 purpose statements, and those are 2 of my purpose statements. And that's what I discovered during that time. And while I was in Peru, that's what I met Tim. And we helped. You came in for a couple of weeks, but I was there for about 5.5, 6 months. And so I was there about 3 months before you came. Oh no, I was there for about you. It was towards the end that I met you because you guys were there for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we went to Machu Picchu together.
Yeah, we swept in and sort of got some things done and then went on our merry way. So just we'll come back to that, and I think the sort of the reasons why that was so foundational for us. But I think there's a few things out of that sort of full exploration of your story there. Um, I mean, I think the first one is, how often we see, sort of, really sort of high performers, people who really sort of keep driving, sort of for success, kind of, they achieve so much, but they keep going, they keep going, they keep going, or they keep picking themselves back up, when they get sideswept by, the events that so many people, encounter in life, and it comes back to the sort of the basically not having had a great time very early on, and that resiliency is sort of built, essentially by trauma, little t or big T, and there was a conversation with this high performance psychologist guy called Michael Gervais, who works with CEO of Microsoft and others, and he was talking about one of his clients who's I think an NBA star is who he was referencing. It was a series of mentions of athletes, who said the one thing he couldn't give his child was the nothingness that he had, and that the drive and the grit that had given him, and just kind of how do you deal with that? I had different experiences to you, but tricky elements of childhood that I think ultimately has become foundational, for good and for bad, for me.
Well, I also think that there's two things with mine too. I also think when I ended up coming out as gay when I was 21, and I didn't even realize it until I was 20. I was a late bloomer. But what happens when you have something that's significant that you don't want to be true is that you have to tear apart everything that you've been told that is wrong and blasphemous, or whatever the wording is. It's there. And it was even worse when I was 21 years old. And you have to dig deep to find out what's real. What do you feel in your heart is real, and is this true or not true? Is everything I've been told? Which part of that can I accept and not accept? Because all of a sudden everything is in question, right? Because it's something so significant to your personal, what makes you a person, has been degraded for so long. It gives you a different. It can do many things. For me, it gave me a drive, but it also gave me a restlessness of always wanting to. Wherever I wasn't satisfied, and that restlessness and that not being satisfied while I moved up. If I moved back, it became very traumatic, right? So I had this, uh, moving up, and then something happened, the industry, things changed, whatever those things were, and that became very traumatic. And then I ended up becoming an alcoholic. And again, everything I thought about alcoholism um, was a bum on the street that was, had no drive, and it was something other than me. I had to break up all those ideas of what that was, and realize, oh, I'm giving up a life that's doing no good for me, and I'm gaining an openness to another one that is so much better.
Yeah.
And so having to go through that redefining what life, how you think, I guess that really led up to how this changing of leadership, and what I realized, and why it resonated with me, because it was the same things. We are often taught things so that this is the way it has to be. Well, the question is it? And you don't have to take those dogmas anymore. And you don't take dogmas just because somebody said it. You actually have to think deeper about it.
Yeah. It's a really curious thread that, I'd be interested to explore, which, we can do a little bit here perhaps, but potentially in more detail. Is this perhaps the sort of the ingredient of reinvention as a capability for succeeding in the world today and certainly in the world ahead? And I think, I'm certainly aware of a lot of high performers who've come from addiction. They were not high performers before they came through,
Very common story,
whatever it was. And yeah, I'd be really curious to examine how critical that the life lessons in addiction and emerging successfully, essentially having, to your point, kind of made a sort of a constructive choice to take one life and put it down, and essentially found another one that then become that. What you do in doing that is develop a skill set that allows you to sort of continually add and subtract and judge what's helping and what's not helping, and reinvent yourself to keep moving forward and adapt and change and shift.
And actually, it's very. I never thought about it this way, but it is a. Actually, I think it's a great attribute, and it's usually something that's forced on people, right? It's not their choice to go out and say, I'm going to rethink about how the world works. There's something that happens.
Yeah.
And so there's two ways we can fall into this trap of dogma. One, I could give Donald Trump as an one. He's caught in this. Okay, I'm gonna be in this dogma, whatever his dogma. Don't even have to define it. But the way I'm gonna keep people there is through fear and tension, and this is how I'm gonna drive you into this way of thinking, because then you're gonna be so afraid to go out of it that that something's going to happen to you, that you're gonna stay with me.
Yeah.
And mainly fear. Not too different, and I'm not sure how it is in Australia, but tends to be a global thing. And when you start going into suburbia, right, and there's a lot of neighborhoods in suburbia and in the U.S. that they become very white, or they become very black, very segmented.
Mm.
And a lot of like-minded thinkers. And all of a sudden, people get in this mindset that everybody needs to be like me, right? And if everybody's like me, then I feel safe, I feel secure, and everybody else is wrong. Because this is how I feel safe and secure, so this is what must be right. And I think this is what we run into with difficulties and openness with diversity and everything when we're talking about leadership and having people listen to other viewpoints and other cultures coming in different language and different body language and all of that stuff. It's opening yourself up. So somebody that's had to go through this trauma of having to reinvent themselves, or reinvent how they think about the world, is more open to the ideals of, it isn't one way. It isn't this one small community, or it isn't fear that's driving me here. It's because I actually thought about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, I mean, essentially, you've just named like 3 key attributes of building a successful culture, right? Like humility, first of all, that I don't have all the answers and I don't know everything all the time, and I have to have enough humility to be open to other ideas. Step 1. Step 2, tolerance for other ideas, and a willingness to accept that at least they might have an approach which could be beneficial, which is contrary to mine, not just different. And the third thing is diversity. But I mean, a lot of the time, diversity has become almost a pop culture term now. But a lot of the time, people don't do the work around humility and tolerance to actually sort of like prepare fertile ground for diversity to be effective. Again, as I was reflecting that, there's this journey which is likely to become, I think, a Netflix doco series in the near future which was the head of the Nantucket project, with a couple of his essentially very long-term friends. And he's also someone who's come out of addiction and spends a lot of time, with groups, sort of that are still wrestling, with their demons around addiction. And he was saying that those are his foundational learning environments for this. Really, what makes society work and what builds culture is looking at how people go through, the stages of their own learning journey, and how often, he uses different language to yours, Tom, but he's essentially talking about they come in with a dogma, they come in with a particular way of thinking. It's okay, I've recognized, I put my hand up, I understand this is my problem, and this is to deal with it. And it sort of takes them time to sort of break down, and whether they're working through 12-step or whatever the process is, it takes them time to sort of break themselves down, get to this point of sort of submission and humility, and then being prepared to be tolerant towards other people's journeys and other people's perspectives. And then they can come into the diversity of, everybody here comes from somewhere different. They might be dealing with different traumas. They might have different, tools that they're treating themselves with from an addiction perspective, but we're all here for the same reason, that we've lost something and we need to find something else.
Right. And it's a common vision. And there's in the 12 steps, there's the 4th step. The whole process is looking at, your resentments or, the problems, you're listing those out and what it causes in you. But what's key in that is at the end, you have to say your part. You have to say, what was your part in that? So if I'm having a fight with somebody, well, okay, you're having a fight. You're so right, but what's your part? What is your part in this? How has this escalated to this? Because it doesn't escalate on one side, right?
Yeah.
And even and we can even look at childhood trauma in that way, in that we look at not that childhood trauma was anyway your fault or anything that happened that had anything to do with you. Your part can just be how you've held on to it, and how you can open yourself up to reframing it.
Yeah.
The other thing is being open to ideas and open and patience, right? You said the tolerance. Well, I came to understand something through all of this process, and that is that impatience is the most selfish act one can perform. Because if you think about it, the reason you become impatient is because somebody isn't doing something the way that you want. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with you. So what does that mean? That means that even if someone isn't doing something the way you want, there's no reason, there is a healthy way to address that, right? And especially in leadership. But impatience does nothing for us to develop somebody into something higher. It may point out an issue, but it's how we deal with the situation, how we open ourselves up, how we empathize, it's like, what is my part in this role that I'm in? And most often, it's our perception or how we're treating a situation that can change the entire dynamic.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting. I mean, I think we might sort of take a sharp segue directly towards leadership for a moment, but I think there's this sort of like simmering pot of sort of interesting reference points in order to do so, because I think we're at this tipping point at the moment where there seems to be, I think certainly in the circles that we move in, a recognition that, a leadership style is deficient, or insufficient. And really, in order to just simply be enough, let alone be successful as a leader, you actually need to first recognize and then adopt and then master different modes, which we refer to as approaches of leadership. And in doing so, it is things like being a servant leader, or being humble and tolerant as a leader. These are the things that are actually adding value as a leader, because you can bring diverse groups together to solve complex problems and adapt to ambiguous change. So in doing so, you first got to overcome, yeah, I think a lot of the sort of the attributes that leaders quite often get criticized for, like being impatient. Oh, well, can't we just get to the end? I've already got the answer. You know, this is what we need to do. I just need to persuade the rest of you to come around to my way of thinking, right? And I was reflecting on a particular anecdote as you were describing that example there of impatience. Someone that we were brought in to coach that had become a borderline bully, but essentially they were really living in anger, and that was obviously generating a lot of fear, a lot of negativity. They had a lot of, you know, sort of retention issues in their team. And this particular conversation that I had with this person that I was engaging in a small part of our program was around the genesis of anger and where does anger come from. And, you know, I'm not, you know, qualified neuroscientist, but I reach onto the bookshelf and grab the expertise out of those pages of those that are. And there's this book up here behind me called The Master and His Emissary. And it's by this brilliant British author talking about the left and right side sort of governances of the cortex. And essentially something that I learned from that book and sort of brought to this dialogue with this executive leader, very serious, very, very sensible, very successful person, was anger quite often is misrepresented in its origin neurologically. People think that anger is a form of aggression and is in response to a threat. But in actual fact, anger is a metabolic stimulator for adrenaline that comes from the recognition of a signal that there's an obstacle in our path. Right? We get angry because something's in our way. Right? Like I put my hand up. I'm completely imperfect in many, many ways, but I get angry with my 6-year-old because he won't go brush his teeth. Right? Like I do my level best not to. Right? Like there's zero threat there. Yeah, he's 6. He's the most wonderful being, but he won't go brush his teeth and he needs to go to bed. Come on you go. And this is where this executive's, you know, real sort of emotional trauma was coming onto the team that they were leading, because they were getting angry because the team wouldn't do what they wanted them to do, and they were moving straight to anger and straight to impulse and straight to, you know, come on, let's just do what needs to be done. They weren't, you know, acting with humility. They weren't acting with tolerance. They weren't actually sort of in a way respecting that they had a team. They had assembled a great team of very, very capable, intuitive, and could have been empowered individuals who would have delivered a great outcome if they brought them together and moved them in the right direction. But that lack of humility, that lack of tolerance, that lack of appreciation for how you apply the benefit of diversity essentially meant that they never got the outcome that they could have got from this great team. So I think, yeah, it's a great statement you make about impatience being the most selfish act you can commit. And I think, you know, anger is not very far away from that.
And I would actually say getting angry at your 6-year-old is more impatience, because he's not doing what you want when you want him.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And with his best interest in mind, but, you know, it's...
No, for sure. But look, this is really building. This is a whole field of work around, you know, what kind of leaders do we need right now? And to throw another book reference out there that, again, I'll put in the show notes, although this one right now is a pre-order. But one of my favorite, you know, empirical authors, Adam Grant, he has a book coming out in February, which is all around humility and why we really need this right now. And I think for leaders, and when I look at the attributes of the great leaders that we have here, humility would absolutely be very high on the list.
And this is actually something that alcoholics and drug addicts suffer from. And we come into, we have a lot of ego when we're deep in our addiction. And we have to work through having humility. And often the working through humility, it's like, I have to be humble. Does that mean I have to be subservient to everybody else? Does that mean there's this process of trying to figure out what humility is, when truly humility is just the recognition that you're human. you don't know everything, that you can provide grace to somebody else, and that you don't have to be the center of attention, and that somebody else can add value. That's it. That's humility. That it's not all about you and your ego and what you need. You're actually helping build somebody else up as well, and
Yeah,
respecting
100%.
what they have to offer. That's humility. It's not being subservient.
No, and I think this is where, and not to criticize another great author, and all of a sudden it feels like we're, in a sort of a recommended reading session. But yeah, David Rock, someone else I'm a fan of. I think to an extent, as much as it's been very popular, I think that the term that he adopted of servant leadership is complicated, right? And I think causes a lot of very, very capable leaders who could be vastly improved by adding a little bit more humility into their work, because I don't want to be a servant. I'm a very successful person. I don't need to be subservient, but what they're missing is that they should be of service, not subservient.
And in servant leadership, one of the key tenets of it is altruism. And altruism, we often think of today as just being good for the good sake, right? Just however, the deeper study of altruism goes back. I was reading something the other day. I forget who it was by, but that altruism goes back to when we were hunters and foragers.
Yeah.
That what altruism is the ability of somebody in the group or the group to be able to mediate anger or aggression. So it's the ability to bring the group together for a common good. So altruism at a survival mechanism is just working together for the common good of the group, so that the group can be fed and eat. However, if you think about it, it's what we're doing in the workplace, right? Ultimately, we all need to be fed and be able to eat, and the way that we make that happen is working together towards a vision of the company to make it successful.
Yeah. I mean, I think collaboration, if we use another sort of classic sort of leadership attribute or skill, there's both, I think, arguably. I think people sort of forget that collaboration actually needs to increase the further down the Maslowian hierarchy you go. I think the assumption is that at a base level, psychologically, we descend into individualism. Because we're in base hygiene mode and we must survive, so we have to think for ourselves. Well, the easiest way to do that is to buddy up, right? And essentially that's what evolutionary psychology and anthropology will tell you, that the only reason that we're here today is because we were more successful at collaborating as we moved through the hygiene modes and further up that hierarchy of needs, and that we've compounded the collaboration effects. But in actual fact, it exists from the very, very early ones. And I think you've summarized a number of the points that I know we've discussed previously, and in terms of the role of leaders and how they can sort of gather a number of threads that you've touched on there already in order to do what we like to talk about here. That little journey that we're on to make the world better. You've talked about at the basic level, it's serving others, being the best you can be, and leading with purpose. I mean, are there any specific things that you would sort of suggest people could do, or questions they should ask themselves, or actions that they can take to start to live in these modes of service and pursuit of purpose?
Well, I think understanding that the greatest leaders are able to inspire people towards a common vision. The only way that you're able to inspire somebody is by developing trust, mutual respect, um, um, dependence, mutual dependence. Even though you have your own mutual dependence in this term is not that you don't have autonomy. It means that you're dependent upon each other to do an even better job. Basically, the sum of the parts is greater than the parts. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that you're able to lead a group towards a common vision, and in that you have you have to understand that this is about people. So do you truly understand why it is that you want to be a leader? What is it about being a leader? Is it just to advance to be a CEO and to be successful? Well, what does that mean to you? What is success to you? And if it doesn't involve having a relationship with people, if you ever make it to being a success, it's probably going to be a pretty unhappy.
Yeah.
So leadership is about people and having a good relationship with people. We also talk about significantly about purpose, defining your purpose. I would recommend that book that we talked about is How Will I Measure My Life? If you don't know what your purpose in life is yet, because it's a good exercise in trying to define just that. We also work on that in our 4I Lead Forward Imagine section.
So let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, this is a dialogue, a conversation, but we are building to a point and a destination, and we're building a number of things, as stage gates on that way. So, I mean, I think you just mentioned lead forward, which I do want to get to, but I also, before we get there, I think this would be just a good point to interject briefly, and she could just disclose specifically what your PhD focus was, and then what you're now doing with that research and that specific expertise that you have, which obviously it all wraps in together.
So this is even funnier for the audience because for whatever reason, I've never been able to get Tim off that PhD because I have an EDD.
Sorry, sure.
Educational doctorate.
Your doctorate, it's writ large in my head that everyone has PhD.
Well, it's interesting too, because as I'm writing about stress and stress management in our stress management process, I do have a verification. As an EDD, in my doctorate of organizational leadership, and I focus on stress, and just for the doctorate, I focus on stress and virtual work. My job is to understand how to educate people on stress and how to, I'm an educator of leadership. Okay, so I'm going to teach you about leadership and how to teach others about leadership. That's what my EDD is about. Where a PhD usually in this area is going to be more about clinical work. Now, my focus was industrial organizational psychology and environmental psychology as well. So the track is like, they run side by side. It's just that my focus is on education versus the theoretical, not the theoretical practice of treatment. So now what was your first question?
Oh, well, that was the response to my first question. The second element of that question was, what are you doing with your research and your expertise, specifically around stress? And then we can get to lead forward.
Yeah. So, well, it's three things. It's the leadership, it's stress, it's virtual environment. Overall, I'm writing this practical manual because I come from a operational background of marketing and leadership. A lot of times people who have their doctorates in either industrial organizational psychology or whether it's a PhD or EDD, the they don't have a background in operations. They don't have a background in actual management. So they're mostly teaching from a theoretical point. So my unique selling proposition is that I have both the academic as well as the practical experience. So why that matters is, well, I'm writing this stress management system for people to be able to do on their own with themselves or their organizations, or to be able to do with their organizations or hire us to do it, is because I'm writing this book to educate people about how to walk through this stress process in a practical way, so that you can understand what's causing it, two, how to deal with it, and three, develop a working plan so you can address it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's outstanding. And let's just talk briefly about Lead Forward. I mean, it's still, sort of a pilot mode right now, but let's at least talk about why we're so excited about it and why we believe it's important.
Well, it's really, actually, this has been an evolution of us developing. Since I finished my doctorate, we decided we wanted to create a program. And we were going to, at first, we were going to just focus on stress, and it's going to be a virtual environment. And then as we developed it, we realized it's what we've been talking about today. What makes a better world leader? What makes somebody create a work environment that, one, is full of purpose, two, has a shared mission with something greater than themselves or their organization, and three, how do you build leaders that can deal with today while moving towards their future and their vision. Even if it today is so full of change, like we are in the pandemic, you can still develop leaders through this time for a long-term vision. And so we started developing this program using the 4 I's of imagine, ignite, immerse, and inspire. And I don't know, do we want to break down what those?
No, I don't think here. I mean, I think it's just simply to say, if you're paying attention, if you're somebody tuning in to this podcast, understanding that, there's a leadership development organization, bringing the guests together, and that we are intentionally trying to create learning experiences in each and every one of these conversations, and that organization, 4I, which I lead and Tom leads in America, has a place for you to go and a space for you to interact, one-on-one and in small, cohesive, peer-to-peer or sectorally, sort of orientated learning cohorts to develop the skills you need right now and for the future as a leader. We have a thing, and it's called Lead Forward, and it's coming soon. I reckon that's probably about as much as we need to do.
And I really do like that it's built on purpose. And
that's the foundation stone.
Purpose and inspiration, and it's developing leaders, because those are learnable leadership attributes.
The other thing that I wanted to do, I think we're certainly moving towards the back end of the conversation today, Tom, but I think something else which I think is contemporaneous and topical, because I think a lot of people certainly that we're interacting with are really starting to try and figure out how they can onboard new people into their teams and how they can grow their entities and their businesses when increasingly those teams are either hybrid or fully remote. And I think that I would ask you a question in a moment about what we've learned about how to do that. But first, I'll just set the context. So Tom and I met, 12 years ago, building a school in Peru. We stayed in touch a little bit through social media. There was certainly a strong bond formed then, but we really didn't have any contact at all of any significance, and certainly zero professional interaction for almost a decade. And then at the very tail end of Tom's doctorate, not PhD, doctorate, Tom reached out to me and essentially said, hey, we've never really spoken about work stuff. Just so you know, this is what I'm now doing. I've come into this leadership, this organizational leadership space. And I see that that's really, where you've, been, sort of making a crust and building a brand since we saw each other. Could you give me some advice about how I get into consulting? Right, like that was the specific request, which was the catalyst for us to start talking professionally.
Leadership development consulting.
All around leadership development consulting. And then relatively quickly, it became obvious to us that actually this should be a co-joined endeavor. And that whilst it might have been easier for me to recommend to Tom, go, sort of sign up with any of the big brands or a local, US domestic, sort of specialist that has an existing brand and a space in the market.
And I wouldn't let him go.
He wouldn't leave me alone. But ultimately, the end game we want is to have something specifically founded, a purpose driven by these aligned values, and to orientate it towards the big endeavor of the day, making the world better, which it so desperately needs. So Tom, that's the context, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed. What would you say are the lessons that we've learned, and any specific tips that you would then say we could give to people that are bringing people into their organizations who are not able to interact with them physically? We're countries apart, time zones apart. We have not been in the same room for 12 years, but here we are completely joined at the hip professionally and aligned in almost every single way. So how have we done that, and what could the audience learn from our experience?
Well, I think one of the key things you said in there is we have aligned, right? We've aligned our thinking, our vision of what we want. We've aligned what our overall purposes are very similar. And in that way, we aligned for where we wanted to go. So that was our first benefit. The second one is that we already had a sense of trust and
Sure.
a sense of respect for each other going into this. So, and we were both had humility and respected each other, and we had good, clear conversation. When we didn't, we pointed it out and we discussed where that was off.
Sometimes, quite frankly, like, I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
So this is the key. Those are the key elements to having a good functioning virtual team.
Yeah.
And many times people don't have those basic elements. They don't have the trust, respect, alignment, role responsibility, and without those, so often they'll break down. And often people will try and treat the virtual relationship just like an in-person relationship. And it's different. It's different. And there's plenty of research that will show you that. But the other thing is that something that we tapped into, because one is my research showed this, and then two, you told me about Cal Newport's work, book Deep Work. And that is what my research found, and where stress was induced was when we were jumping back and forth from task to task to task.
Yeah.
That's when we were least productive, and that's where stress went up the most. It's not that we're working virtually, and it's not that we're working in person. It's when we start combining all of it, working and jumping back and forth, that's where the stress starts. But also when you're jumping back and forth, that's where you're not getting any deep work. And deep work is really strategic, really thoughtful thinking. So through our trust and we're both accountable and responsible, we agreed to what we're going to produce for the next time we're going to show up, and then we show up with that. And if we can't, we let the other person know beforehand. But these are things that we do naturally with each other that many times you have to teach the team these skills.
Yeah, and I think that's a great summation. Well, it's a great summation of the conversation, but I think it's an absolute synopsis of what we have done And yeah, maybe we've done it intuitively, but I think ultimately what it speaks to is the fact that, you've spent years researching and studying how to do this, but you've also spent decades practicing it and learning at least as much about what not to do as what to do. And now you're absolutely conscious of what is best practice. So that is all that you apply. I'll say 95% of the time, that's all you apply. And the rest, we're still learning, we're still wrestling with that. And I've just kind of fumbled my way through it and, figured it out as I've went and, banged my head against lots of different walls and spiky objects. But
you're way better. You're way better at it than you give yourself credit. I think some ways you do. You're amazing.
Stop
you
it.
Really are.
Stop talking.
Okay. There's the English coming in.
The Britishness.
I can't take
Stop that. No compliments here. None. Stop it. No, but no, I do hear them and receive them, and I'm grateful for them. But I think to your point, this stuff is teachable, right? Like, of everything that we're doing, only a fraction is innate, right? Like, the rest we have learned either academically through studying the theory and then we've applied it, or we've learnt it the other way, by picking up enough rocks and seeing what's under there and seeing how far we can carry them and figuring it out. And what we're trying to do here is essentially try and allow you, if you're tuning into this, to not have to pick up so many rocks, right? Like, we're imperfect. We've made tens of thousands of mistakes. But we've also, I think, to an extent, very much sort of proven with ourselves and with our clients, this is a way to make this work. This is a way to rise to purpose. This is a way to live your values. This is a way to build an organization that allows you to lead in a very resilient and adaptable way. And that is now a minimum to succeed in the world that we all live in, and we will do for the foreseeable future. So I hope that if you're listening to this, you can receive that statement in the way I intend it to be made, which is objective and not born out of ego, but born out of service. And we want to serve you so that you can be a better leader, so that you can make the world better for us and for you and for your kids and all that you love.
Oh, absolutely. We didn't even get into shared purpose with, but that's all right. It was good.
Dude, this is not a 24-hour broadcast. And even if we did a 24-hour broadcast, we still wouldn't cover all the stuff that we typically talk about. So look, what I'm going to say is I think I'm going to ask you just one more question, and then we'll let it rest here. But I certainly look forward to welcoming you back on to this show at some point over the next couple of seasons, and we can pick up on all of those threads that are still hanging there. And of course, you have your own YouTube channel. I have mine. There's the 4i one. There's any number of examples of work and our work together at 4ileadership.com. And in terms of reaching out to Tom, scroll down to the show notes for his LinkedIn profile, all of his social media, and obviously his space on the 4i website. So Tom, final question to you: a sort of a parting call to action for somebody that's received this conversation, that might be pondering some of the things that you've been through or that you've suggested, and maybe just if you could just give them some impetus in a short statement just before we sign off for the day.
How do you want to give back to the world? What is it? And it doesn't have to be the world at large. It can be. It could be your own little world. It could be your family. It could be your community. But how are you going to make a difference? And develop a plan and figure out what that is, and then develop a plan, because there's no reason you can't make it happen.
Beautifully said, my friend. Beautifully said. There we go. That's definitely a soundbite, but that is a heartfelt and a purpose-driven message for me. I'm a recipient of that, and for you all tuning in today. So we will say fairly well to my dear friend, and I hope soon to be yours as well, Dr. Tom Alan-Livernois. Thank you for your time and your...
Thank you, my friend.
joy, and many blessings. Talk to you soon.
You'll find audio and video recordings for this episode, as well as links and related resources mentioned today in the podcast area of 4iLeadership.com/insights. This is the Better World Leaders podcast, brought to you by 4i Leadership.